We begin with fairly aggressive titles. I almost always have a title sequence that's separate from the movie and is not layered over, let's say, the first scene in the movie. And I think it's something that takes the audience out of their street life and puts them into the shape of the movie. And in this case, we have a kind of pseudo Jackson Pollock being created right before our eyes, with some very aggressive music from Howard Shore and Metric, the group Metric. It really, the Jackson Pollock is kind of the active painting, the action painting, really gives you the energy of our lead character, Eric Packer, who also collects art, as we understand, so it is relevant that way. And we begin with limos, because of course most of the movie takes place in a limo, and the limo is actually the entree into the whole concept of the book Cosmopolis for Don DeLillo. It was really his wondering about who lives in these limos and why they have such large cars in the narrow streets of New York that started him writing and inventing a character who might be in those limos, and that was the beginning of the book Cosmopolis, and so the movie. And here we, of course, see right from the beginning, you get immediately a taste of the style of dialogue that is unique to Don DeLillo. It's very stylized. It's in some ways it is the way American speech falls, but it's also very stylized. And I think of it in a way as Pinteresque, like the very stylized dialogue of Harold Pinter, the playwright. And you get that kind. You get a unique rhythm of dialogue in the writing of Don DeLillo. And I didn't want to change any of that. The dialogue in the movie is 100% from the book, without any changes. Some omissions of some scenes and so on, but the dialogue is all there in the book. If you read the book, you will find it very familiar once you've seen the movie.
Absolutely, yes. My car, this car.
And so immediately we're in the world of the movie, which is the world of Eric Packer's limo.
I want you to tell me that you still have.
What you're seeing now is really the inside of a set. Through the windows, we had green screen, which then is replaced by the world outside the limo. And I deliberately wanted it to be not quite realistic. That is to say, it's almost as though the screens really are playing a movie that is the outside world. So the limo is meant to be very separated, very isolated from the life of the city, as Eric Packer's life is isolated from the lives of most other human beings. And so there's really you hear no sound. You don't hear any road sound or wheel rumble or engine sound. And it's kind of extreme, and it made my sound editors very nervous, because it's not normally what you do. You try to, you try to keep something like this alive with the sound of at least some feel of the outside world, not to mention the sound of the machine, which is the car. But in this case, the limo is Eric's submarine. I showed my crew the German movie Das Boot, which takes place mostly inside a submarine, and also the Israeli movie Lebanon, which takes place entirely inside a tank.
10 minutes, patterns, ratios.
And to encourage them and to show them that you could do some very interesting things when making a movie which is in a very confined space, in some vehicle, which then becomes, it takes on its own surreal quality and becomes in a way a kind of a spaceship even, or a time capsule, and then later we feel that it becomes a kind of a tomb or a crypt for Eric Packer. So it immediately is not a normal limo.
What makes you think we're in the car instead of the office? If I answer that question...
And we see right here
I know I'll say something that's...
the pattern of the movie, the structure of the movie is established immediately, which is to say that a series of characters come to the limo. Eric forces, in a way, people to come to him, to enter his world, the world of the limo, in which he has total control. And it's interesting that the style of dialogue is similar for all the characters, and it does add a kind of coherence and cohesiveness to a work when, in a perhaps unrealistic way, everyone speaks in the same kind of rhythms. But it's also realistic in the sense that Eric is an extremely powerful man, and most of the people who come to see him in his limo are his employees. And just as you might say that everybody at the Apple Corporation talks like Steve Jobs now, there's a strange rhythm in that corporation. You could say that it's a kind of accurate, that when one man really controls a number of employees, they begin to speak like him. Their speech patterns fall into his patterns, and their thinking patterns fall into his patterns. Now, when the limo door opened so that Eric could jump out and get into the taxi, you hear the outside city, the sound of the city swell and invade the limo, and then when the door closes, it disappears again. And that's realistic, but also exaggerated and heightened, because you hear nothing of the city at all when the doors to the limos when the doors to the limo are closed.
What are we going to talk about?
We want a heliport on the roof.
Some journalists wanted to make a connection between the life of a celebrity, like our star Rob Pattinson, and Eric Packer. But you can see here that it's a big difference, because Eric Packer really wants to be invisible. He really wants to be a non-celebrity, which is why his limo looks from the outside like everybody else's limo. He wants that. In fact, he talks about it later in the movie. He wants to be invisible. That gives him some of the power that he has in his bond trading and so on, that people don't know who he is or what he's doing. And in a way, he's like what they call the London whale, who was a trader in London who traded billions and billions of dollars of worth of bonds and stocks and so on. Massive amounts that really affected the markets. But nobody knew who he was. They didn't know what he looked like, where he lived, what his hours were, and so on. That was part of his strength. And so Eric Packer is not a celebrity, and you can see here he's able to have lunch with his wife, and there are no paparazzi around, and nobody cares, and nobody knows who he is, and that's the way he wants it. Very different from the life of a movie star, let's say. Now, of course, we meet Elise, and we hear the rhythms that she has, and we realize that she is, in some ways, very similar in her disconnectedness to Eric. They're really two of a kind. She lives a life that's very isolated and refined and elite, and is very disconnected from the life of the streets. While we were shooting this scene, we did have a lot of fans of Rob Pattinson just outside the range of the camera, and that was very unlike Eric Packer, as I say.
Who the fuck is his?
The president's. This means a ride across town does not happen unless we make a day of it with cookies and milk.
Do people still shoot at presidents?
We wonder here
stimulating targets.
why Eric is so obsessed with a haircut. It seems like a very superficial and kind of whimsical and kind of willful thing for a wealthy man to be obsessing about. And we gradually do come to realize why this haircut is very significant. We'll get to that later.
I mean, there's reason to believe we may be leveraging too rash.
So one of the things we see here with the Michael Chin character is his youth. You know, that incredibly young, even younger than Eric Packer, who we understand is 28 and a billionaire, and feeling his age, feeling that he is aging. And it's some of his employees like Michael Chin who make him feel like an old, rapidly aging tycoon. We see here the design of the limo. I wanted the interior to be quite different from a normal limo, and one of the ways I did that was to have Eric's seat be unique, be centered, and be kind of a throne. And it's kind of a power seat, something that you only would realize when you got inside the limo. Because, as I say, he wants it to be rather anonymous from the outside. The screens that you see inside the limo, the information screens, were all, when we were shooting the movie, were green screen. This is a unique green color that you then can replace with anything you like. And you do it after the fact, and it's much more convenient and gives you much more control than the old way of doing it, or which would be to have video playback happening while you're actually shooting. That just adds another layer of complexity and coordination and so on. It's much easier it makes it more difficult to actually get on the screens what you want at the time that you want it. So it's better really to do it in post-production. So a lot of green around when we were shooting, none of which will see in the movie, because, as I say, it's not a normal, natural green. It's deliberately meant to be a unique green that you can then target to be removed and replaced with something else. And you're seeing that through the back window right now.
World worth pursuing both professionally and intellectually. What is it, Michael? The interaction between technology and capital.
You realize
the inseparability.
By this time that Michael Chin is intimidated by his boss. He's able to play with him, but as Shiner, the character who was in the limo in the scene before, also they are in a way afraid to say the wrong thing to their boss, and they know that he likes to play games, head games, word games, money games. It's part of the way he works and part of the way he intimidates his employees.
Russian rats.
Britain converts the rat.
Joins trend to universal currency.
Yes, the U.S. establishes rat standard.
Yes, every U.S. dollar redeemable for rat.
The quote about a rat becoming the unit of currency, which they're playing with now, is from a famous Polish poet. I think his poem was called Report from the Besieged City. This scene in the novel takes place in Didi, that's the character played by Juliette Binoche here, takes place in her apartment. And I felt that it wasn't so interesting visually for me to do that. I thought it would be a lot more interesting to bring her and the sex play that they have into the limo, and it would give us a chance to use the limo in a way that we wouldn't be able to use it in any other scene. And so that was my challenge to Juliette. It was use the limo, play with it, use the space, limited though it is.
What?
The wedding.
In this scene, you can see that the information screens are quiet, and they're just a kind of a quiet blue. Originally, we were planning to have information constantly streaming here, and it was a budget consideration, honestly, that led us to decide which scenes really needed the info and which would be perhaps okay with something neutral. And it ended up, I think, being an advantage, really. I think it calmed the scene down and focused it, and in a way that it wouldn't have been with a lot of stuff scrolling through the screen. So I didn't really think that was was something that would damage us. I actually ended up liking it better than what we had originally thought we would do.
You look
And
gorgeous
you can see
today.
that Juliet is very inventive and very playful. And her character, Dee Dee, in one short scene really exhibits 3 or 4 different levels of character expression. You know, she's sensual, she's playful, she's kittenish, she's jealous. And then she can be hard, and then she can be an entrepreneur, and she's selling art. And then later she can be philosophical and emotional. And rather melancholy.
Is she good in a limo?
I don't know
You
yet.
see at the moment that the windows are dark in the limo, and it was a conceit that I wanted to convey, which is that
What's that?
the windows of the limo can go dark or go light, go transparent, whenever Eric wanted them to. And it was almost as though it was just, he just had to think it, and it would happen. We don't see or make a big deal out of him pressing a button or pressing an icon on a screen or anything like that. So at a certain point,
I've been thinking about the chapel.
when he wants it, something, some information that he's interested in will suddenly appear on a screen, as it does here. And this is the Rothko Chapel that is being discussed at the moment. The artwork of Mark Rothko, an American painter, which we will encounter later.
If they sell me the chapel, I'll keep it intact.
And it's interesting that it's a chapel as well as a collection of paintings that Eric wants to possess. There's a spirituality in the Rothkos, and particularly, of course, when it's in the context of a chapel,
Let them buy it.
and it's
Let them out.
it represents a kind of serenity or calm or philosophical balance that Eric wants to have, but the only way he knows to acquire anything is to buy it. And so that's why he's trying to buy this chapel, rather than just to absorb it in a sort of aesthetic and philosophical way and acquire what the artwork has to offer that way. And we see now being agitated, and he decides to allow the city to come back in, come back into the limo, and the windows go transparent.
I have 2 private elevators now. One is programmed to play Satie's piano pieces.
In the novel, we do begin in Eric's amazing, unbelievable apartment, which has shark tanks and God knows what. It is immense, and so the only hint we really get of that is through dialogue like this, where he says that he could make room for the entire chapel in his apartment, basically, and you get a sense of what is real. I mean, that is to say, some apartments that are now selling for $200 million in New York City, they're huge, immense. And so Eric is one of those billionaires who lives there. But I really felt that I really didn't want to have to deal with that in the movie. That is to say, to create that apartment and begin Eric's journey there. I thought we really should start with the limo, and so we have.
28?
28. I want you to go to the chapel and make them an offer.
It was the dialogue, really, that made me think that
I want everything that's there.
Cosmopolis, the book, could be a movie.
I remember what you told me.
I wrote the script in 6 days, and which is unique for me and very quick. And what I was really doing was trying to see if the book really was a movie. And to do that, I just basically transcribed the dialogue, all the dialogue in the book, and put it into screenplay form. And that took me 3 days. And then the next 3 days, I filled in the descriptions of locations and actions and so on. And then at the end of it, I said to myself, okay, I'm going to read this, and is this a movie or not? And I thought, yeah, it is a movie. It's a movie I want to make, too. And I have the screenplay right here after 6 days. That's amazing. I mean, it can easily take you a couple of years to write a screenplay.
Complex.
Many of the events in the novel, which of course are all fictional, at the time were seen. I think the novel really didn't get a very good critical reception at the time. It was shortly after 9/11 that the book came out, and I think people felt that somehow the book was taking place in New York City, but didn't really address the catastrophe of 9/11 was lacking and so on. And you read articles called Reconsidering Cosmopolis and so on, because of course they're now seeing that DeLillo was rather prescient in his anticipation of events in the world of economics and world events and so on. And so
You know what today is?
while we were shooting scenes of riots in the streets of New York, the Occupy Wall Street manifestations were happening. They weren't exactly riots, but it's interesting to note that some reviewers actually said when the book came out, these scenes of demonstrations and riots in the streets of New York, especially in Wall Street, are completely unconvincing. It would never happen. And now, of course, in retrospect, you see that DeLillo really, his antennae were very accurate and were very, very sensitive to events that were about to occur.
Face. And I don't need to look at all those screens. I know what's happening.
The yuan will fall.
That's right.
Consumer spending's down.
That's right.
Now, the discussion of the yuan here, and one of the few changes crucial changes that I made to the screenplay compared with the book was to change the Japanese yen to the Chinese yuan, because since it's the yen in the book, and since the book came out, of course, Japan has fallen on very difficult economic times, and China has risen and has become the world power of the future. And although the yuan is not a completely convertible currency, and therefore, in a way, I'm kind of fudging it because it can't really be traded the way we're suggesting it can in the movie, it is supposed to become more convertible by 2014 and a little bit later. So in a way, this is my futurism. I'm anticipating where the yuan will go, and many people think it will replace the U.S. dollar as the world currency. So I'm just kind of anticipating that there. It's a little bit of future-proofing, let's say, that I did here.
What? Every day.
No matter...
Wherever I am. That's
Once
right.
again, you have a man here with Eric Packer who is in some ways obsessed with his body, and in some ways is really disconnected from his body. It's almost as though the obsession with his body and his health is to compensate for his inability really to feel his body, to feel things, not just emotional things, but almost physical things.
Here comes your house.
His approach to life is very abstract and disconnected and disembodied.
It happens.
You're right. I didn't think of that.
We died because it's the weekend.
One of the investors in this movie is a genuine French billionaire named Edouard Carmignac, who wanted to be involved with this movie because he felt the portrayal of Eric was extremely accurate in terms of the people who live in the world of international money and people that he himself deals with on a daily basis. They live in a strange kind of abstracted bubble, and their understanding of money even is extremely abstract. And so we see here with Eric, he's a man who deals with billions of dollars every day, but it doesn't really ever touch money, and he doesn't really almost know how to spend money, and he doesn't know how to buy things in the street. He knows how to buy things in the abstract. He knows how to have people buy things for him.
Each month, more on the way. Large Chinese corporations. This is good.
Now, this is undoubtedly one of the longest prostate exams in history. Certainly, I don't know how many there are in cinema, but in cinematic history, definitely. And Rob, who has not had a prostate exam, being the young man that he is, didn't realize that a normal prostate exam takes about 10 seconds instead of 3 or 4 minutes. I told him that if he ever finds a doctor who's giving him a prostate exam that takes this long, then I think he should be aware that the doctor has a hidden agenda vis-a-vis Rob.
There's a rumor, it seems, involving the finance minister. Some kind of scandal.
This is really very much as it is written in the novel. But of course, when you're a novelist, you don't really have to find the right angle to shoot from. And this particular angle, for example, took me a while to figure out how do I shoot this without, getting an X rating.
The meaning of the pause. So it may be deeper, even, than grammar. He may be breathing.
Really, Rob surprised me every day with what he did. I was really so surprised in such a wonderful way by him. I knew he was a good actor, but I think, this movie revealed to me that he was a superb actor. And he just does beautiful, beautiful, subtle, and funny things. He realized right away that the script was funny, very funny. And DeLillo has a very dry, deep sense of humor. And many of the first reviews we got were conducted on a very serious, heavy tone level, and didn't address the humor at all. And you sort of wondered whether the critics realized that this is actually quite a funny movie. And eventually, I think, it became more and more obvious that it was, and it was addressed more and more. It's really, in some ways, a comedy.
Never spent this kind of time together.
Your prostate is asymmetrical.
Finding ways to shoot in the limo is actually really exciting. The restriction of shooting in a confined space is something I actually like a lot. It really, to me, is very exhilarating, and I'm not sure I would have been great shooting Lawrence of Arabia with those vast desert expanses and so on. But this kind of stuff I really like. And I think without getting too flashy or extreme or exaggerated or cartoon-like, we did some very interesting visual things with the limo. You can see here, in the very far background, that was all green screen. You wouldn't see those buildings, but the taxi was something that we did actually have on our set. So we had sort of a layer of what we call street furniture, which is to say newsstands and lampposts and so on, and fire hydrants and a sidewalk. But then behind that would just be green screen. And it's pretty impeccable. I mean, it's really very convincing. And of course, though it takes place in New York City on 47th Street, we shot it in a studio in Toronto. We did shoot outside on location for some scenes. It's strange. Apparently, 47th Street, even if we had shot on the real street, it would not have looked like the 47th Street of Don DeLillo's novel, because in just 10 or 12 years, it's changed very, very much. And so locations like this bookstore, the Mercantile Library, don't exist anymore on 47th Street, so we wouldn't have seen it even if we'd actually shot in New York City. The strange thing is, too, that the parking meters in New York City, the ones that you where you buy a little ticket and put it on your dash, are exactly the same brand as the ones in Toronto and the same color. And so we didn't even have to change those to make it convincing that we were in New York on 47th Street.
Saw my heart on the screen.
I don't like saying this.
But
You smell of sex.
Such a strange and interesting relationship between these two, this couple. I don't think I've ever seen anything like that in movies before. They're very attractive, they're very sexy, very charismatic. They never have sex in the movie. They never kiss. They don't really touch. It's a very strange, disconnected relationship.
I'm not sure how.
Very verbal, very abstract. And as I say, you know, she, Elise, played by a Canadian actress, Sarah Gadon, is very much, though she aspires to be a poet and thinks of herself as a poet and an artist, but we understand that she comes from a very wealthy family, and really she comes from the same place that he comes from. And so they're really a matched pair. Unfortunately, the kind of people they are makes it impossible for them to really be matched, to really connect. And the relationship just kind of slips and slides.
Do you know why?
They just slide past each other.
You feel hidden. You like to hide. From what?
Sometimes only noise.
You're one of those silent, wistful children, glued to the shadows.
And you?
I don't know. I don't
Even the
think
most
about it.
common human
About one thing and tell me what it was.
relational things like sex are difficult for them. Abstract problems, philosophical problems, emotional problems, logistical problems.
I like that. Such
And so
science.
the fact that they have money and power does not make anything easier for them. In fact, it makes it much more difficult for them.
I thought we liked it there. After all the planning, all the construction. To get away, to be alone together. It's quiet at the lake.
It's quiet in town.
Where we live, yes, I suppose. High enough, far enough. What about your car?
They are both control freaks,
Not
and
so
they
quiet,
both
Toby. You spend a lot of
need to have total control over every tiny aspect of their lives. And of course, that when you have two people like that in a relationship, it makes it very, very difficult.
Take a vehicle's base unit and cut it in half with a huge
Now,
throbbing
when
buzzsaw device.
Eric talks about Prousting the limo, he's referring to the French author Marcel Proust, who very famously lined his bedroom with cork so that he could write with complete silence. He used the cork to
It's lovely, actually. I love that.
filter out all sound and to isolate himself. And so he talks about Prousting his limo in a similar way.
It's a thing a man does.
And I jumped on that and decided that he would be more successful in filtering out all sound than he admits to. He says here, it didn't work really. It's impossible to filter out all the sound of the city. But you make the attempt. But I really like the idea that, in fact, he was more successful doing it than he admits to.
The cork. This is what finally matters.
Is this what I wanted?
Tell me what you wanted.
Duck consomme with an herb twist. It's true, you know. You do actually reek of sexual discharge.
It's not the sex you think I've had. It's the sex I want. That's what you smell on me. Because the more I look at you, the more I know about us both.
Tell me what that means. Or don't.
Deciding where to put
Yeah,
the
okay.
camera when you're shooting a close-up is a kind of crucial thing. Here I use wide lenses, short lenses, which means that to do a close-up, you really have to get the camera physically very close to the actor. It almost makes it difficult for the actor to see the other actor on the other side of the camera.
I was going to.
But it gives you a feeling of physical intimacy. It also throws the background into focus, into more sharper focus than you would normally get with what we call a long lens or a portrait lens, where the camera would be physically further away from the actor's face and the background would be defocused more. And that's the sort of more classic kind of portraiture.
That's one of the meanings. To arouse a passionate feeling. We can finish what we barely
started. But by using a short lens close to the actor, you really put the actor in context. The face does not fill the frame completely. It really, you really feel the surrounding of the actor.
Son los muchachos locos del rata otra vez.
Now, you do find in New York the rat, the symbol of the rat. There are huge blow-up rats that you will find in New York from activists, and they are kind of anti-Wall Street, anti-capitalist symbols, those huge rats that you can find. And when I was doing location hunting, we actually saw some of those rats. Not actual rats, but symbolic puppet rats, which of course we will see more of in this movie. Now it's interesting that Samantha Morton should play a character who is Eric Packer's chief of theory, that he feels he needs someone to talk to him in a very philosophical tone, to talk philosophy, the philosophy of money. What is the future of money? Where is money going? What does money mean? What does time mean relative to money? And so on. And though it's extremely hard to absorb everything that's said in this movie, and it is pretty talky, no question, it really does all make sense. It's actually really very intelligent, provocative stuff that DeLillo has written. And if you see the movie more than once, it will, instead of sort of overwhelming you, it will start to make real sense. And it can be quite disturbing, actually, because the implications of a lot of what the characters are saying, in particular Samantha's character, the implications are kind of very disturbing. And I think, as time goes on, are proving to be more and more accurate, even as they are disturbing.
Because time is a corporate asset now. It belongs to the free market system.
I would say then that Cosmopolis is, you really have to call it a philosophical novel. And there's it's a comedy, it's a bit of a tragedy, and it's a social commentary, but it's also philosophy. Now, once again, you're seeing green screen in the background with some live action in the foreground. And of course, you're seeing our version of the New York Wall Street rat. And once again, very muted sound, very exaggerated.
You have to understand, the more visionary the idea, the more people.
And it really, if you think of what's happening outside the limo is really being sort of playing on television, you get a kind of a compressed version of what most people experience every day when they watch news on television, and they're watching all kinds of disasters and upheavals and disruptions and still, having their drinks at home, and it's not necessarily a criticism. In a way, it's the reality that you are. We have information flowing from all over the world, but what touches our actual life, as in terms of our actual skin and our physical existence as a physical creature, is actually very limited in comparison to what we are absorbing visually and intellectually and through the media that are everywhere now. You have the internet in your pocket, as Steve Jobs would have it, and the implications of that are enormous. This is a quote. This is a kind of an allusion to Karl Marx's Communist Manifesto, which begins, "A specter is haunting Europe, the specter of communism." And he meant that in a positive way, that communism should and would change Europe. And here we have a specter is haunting the world, the specter of capitalism. A specter is haunting the world, the specter of capitalism. There are many capitalists who read Karl Marx because, though they disavow any interest in communism, they feel that Marx really understood capitalism very well and described it in a way that no one had ever quite been able to do before him. And ironically, in a way, if you want to be a good capitalist, you have to read Karl Marx to really understand how to control the markets and so on.
One after another in all their lotus positions.
Imagine the pain. Sit here, feel it.
Immolating themselves
And here
endlessly.
you see Eric. This is as far as he can go with empathy. You know, his chief of theory has zero empathy. What's happening outside the limo for her, people actually immolating themselves in protest and suffering incredible pain. For her, it's just a sort of theoretical act, symbolic act, and she can't really and doesn't want to connect with the physical human reality of it. Eric is able to kind of get a little further along the line towards that, but
Now we know.
Now we have to act on,
not much.
But we still want what we want. We want a haircut.
It's interesting, isn't it? About men and immortality. You live in a tower that soars to heaven and goes unpunished by God. And you
Oh, in this scene, there's a discussion of an airplane that Eric has bought. An amazing fighter plane, bomber. And
It's an old Tu-160. NATO calls it black.
there was some discussion at first about whether we should show that plane. You could actually find clips of it on the internet and so on. You could get some documentary footage of it and show it on the screens. And we tried it. We did that. And it seemed kind of hokey, and I thought it was better to leave it as just concepts and dialogue between the two of them, rather than trying to allude to, to make it more physically present, because in a way it is, once again, it's an abstraction. It's a concept. And I knew we were taking a chance because, as I say, I mean, we of course we know there's a lot of dialogue in this movie, and sometimes audiences are not that patient with that much dialogue and description and so on, verbal description. But I really wanted to be faithful to the novel that way, and to be that extreme, really. And at the same time, you get shots like this, which for me visually are really more interesting than some documentary shot of a Russian bomber. Let's put it that way.
In their present form, they're just about dead as distinct units. A box, a screen.
Samantha said this was the hardest role she'd ever played, and she's constantly just sitting in a seat, and she never moves from there. But it is incredibly difficult role, the concentration and the rhythm of the dialogue, which has to be absolutely solid. There's no hesitation possible there. And it's interesting, too, I wanted her to be the only one who gets to sit in Eric's throne. She's the only one that he has that kind of respect for. He would allow her to take a position of prominence there.
My number. And I got lazy.
What are you gonna do about it?
The way the scene was written, you'd really come into the scene after the sex was over, and then it was sort of post-coital conversation. And that's the way the actors thought it was going to be. But on the day I said, it's going to be a lot more interesting if the dialogue happens while you're having sex. And I think we should do it that way. And they were completely kind of unprepared for that, kind of thrown for that. They were kind of unprepared for that and kind of thrown by that. But they were game. And it just, it's really basically one angle, one shot.
What's he gonna say to you about all this?
There is a cut in it, a couple of cuts in it, but it's really, the choreography is very simple. And the shooting is very simple. But for the actors, it was not simple, obviously.
That's the job.
And you see here, you begin to get an understanding of Eric's relationship, not with the woman he's having sex with, with his bodyguard, Torval. He seems to be obsessed with him. He keeps talking about him to her. And it's almost as though this is a threesome, or maybe, in a way, he's actually having sex with Torval. It's a beginning of something that you gradually begin to realize is a strange, dysfunctional, kind of perverse relationship that he has with Torval. Not a sexual one, but or at least not obviously.
Do you find this interesting?
And it has repercussions later, as we'll see.
Protecting someone in danger. What makes you willing to do this?
And in a way, Eric can't even have sex without sort of observing himself having sex and making observations and comments on it. And everything seems to be difficult for him.
I don't think about the risk. You're the man in the crosshairs. I figure the risk is yours.
Is it interesting?
It's interesting to be near a man somebody wants to kill.
You know what they say, don't you?
What?
The logical extension of business is murder. Move to the left.
Move to the left.
Yeah. Nice. Perfect. What kind of weapon did he give you?
Taser. He doesn't trust me yet with deadly force.
But here, once again, you see that Eric is kind of pathetically desperate to feel something, without it being, I don't think, kind of obvious. Even anything that can break through the kind of... It's as though he's always in that limo, isolated from everything. And he's really, in a way, he's created it himself. It's a carapace. It's a shell, like an undersea creature's shell to protect him. But at the same time, he wants something to break through it and get into his tissues. The actual tissues of his body. And so he's even willing to be tasered in order to feel something intense that will shock him and that will, it's almost, taser as shock treatment to kind of scramble his mind and scramble his brain and get him out of himself and get him out of his patterns.
to know where you're going.
Wait and learn.
Well, here you begin to see how dismissive and sort of condescending he is to his own bodyguard, someone he's hired and trained, and yet has disdain for somehow. And that's because his bodyguard is also his jailer, in that he's, without realizing it, he is
She notices herself and other people.
enhancing the confines of Eric's life and surrounding him with himself and with his inability to have free movement and to feel free. And this is, once again, this is not the sort of paparazzi celebrity problem, but more in the movie, it's in the book, it's more it's a genuine security thing. It has to do with someone stalking you to kill you, kidnap you, perhaps, because you're so rich and so on. And here you see Eric trying to figure out how to be a human being. How do people really talk? How do husbands talk to wives? And I love the moment when Elise, when he says,
Where is your jacket?
"This is how people talk, isn't it?" And she says, "How would I know?" And you realize, if you didn't realize it up to that point, that she really doesn't know. She is like him. They are from the same place. And that's why they can't live together.
You saw the car? We were under attack by anarchists. Just 2 hours ago, there were major global protests. Now what?
This restaurant was actually a restaurant that I had a meeting with my two producers, Martin Cates and Paolo Branco, to talk about the movie. And I liked the restaurant so much that I thought it should be the site of this scene.
You wanted to take me to?
We don't need a hotel. We'll do it in the ladies' room. We'll go to the alley out back and rattle the garbage cans.
Beautiful cinematography throughout the movie by Peter Sushetsky, who's worked with me exclusively, well, for me anyway, since 1988 when we did Dead Ringers together.
I understand this at some level. How people look, what people wear.
How they smell. Do you mind my saying that?
And I think you begin to see here, more of the beautiful, subtle nuances of performance from Rob. You see the vulnerability here, the emotional vulnerability. You begin to see he's not the brash, cocky, kind of condescending, nasty guy that you saw at the beginning of the movie. In the course of one day, he's really making a journey that's not just physical, but psychological.
My prostate is asymmetrical.
What does that mean?
He's not sure what he's looking for, but he knows that he needs to be someone else other than who he was at the beginning of the movie.
You just saw a doctor.
And I think you see real pain and melancholy and sadness. I mean, in some ways, this is a very sad movie.
Capital's portfolio has been reduced to near nothingness.
And Rob is playing it beautifully here.
My personal fortune in the tens of billions is in ruinous convergence with this fact. And there's been a credible threat on my life.
This is his version of desperation, which is kind of strange, but it really is. I mean, here you really feel that in his own very bizarre way, he is desperate to keep their relationship together. And in the novel, there is a strange scene of reconciliation. There is a scene in which Eric comes across a movie being shot in the nighttime streets of New York, where there are about 150 naked extras lying around on the ground having an orgy in the streets of New York. And he decides to join that group and lies down beside Elise, who by happenstance happens to be one of the extras. And at that moment they have a kind of reconciliation. And I left that out of the movie because I really felt that was a fantasy of Eric's, and it really would, you could never believe that would really happen. You would not get, 150 naked people lying on the streets of New York shooting a movie with no police, with no, barriers to you just sort of going and joining them and so on and so on. It just didn't seem realistic at all. And I really, it felt to me like a fantasy of Eric's. and a fantasy of reconciliation. And so I really felt that they never really do get back together, that when she says, "This is your lucky day," she means it. They're finished.
Look how good they feel. Kids. They are kids, exactly. What pain do they feel that they need to take pill? Music? Okay. Too loud, so what?
Once again, you get the feeling that Eric's obsession with Torval really, in a way, controls this scene without it being said.
But what pain do they feel too young to buy beer?
In a direct way. And we played it that
I don't believe I'm here.
Eric would never look at Torval directly. He never actually looks at him until one crucial moment in the movie. It's as though Torval, he can't bear to look at him, or he can't really quite acknowledge his existence and the position that he plays in his life. And so even though here he's talking to his other sort of temporary part-time bodyguard,
What do you think?
subliminally the discussion is about Torval.
Like lunch.
What do we know?
We know it's not a group.
Now here we see once again the sort of disconnected relationship that these two men have.
Individual. Do we care?
We don't have a name, but we have a phone call.
Our limo was being pushed along our streets by grips. It really didn't have a motor. It really would come apart in about 24 pieces, like a kind of a Lego car, and would be pushed along our set by grips on little casters. Once again, green screen is the most farthest from us element there, and then in the foreground there are real streets, real sidewalks that we've built, and street furniture, and of course the extras are for real.
What?
Dead.
No. What? Can't be.
And here you see that Eric, his connection with music and with
Funeral's been in progress all day.
rappers is sort of one of the ways that he can experience the emotions that most people experience in a much more direct way.
I don't know this. How can this
And you see him at his most emotional, really, in this scene with Cosmo.
What, they shot him?
Fed's been having cardiac problems for years, since high school. Been seeing specialists, been seeing faith healers. The heart just wore out. This ain't a thug down some alley. The man has never been breathalyzed, barely, since he's 17. Hope you're not disappointed.
Disappointed?
That our man here wasn't shot.
Music is really an important element of the movie, of course, as it is in Eric's life. And for the most part, the music was, the approach that Howard Shore and I took was, it was similar in a way to the music that Howard did for my movie Crash. That is to say, it's not symphonic and it's not melodic and lyrical as it is in, let's say, A Dangerous Method, where the music of Wagner is a sort of a metaphor and a controlling element, and therefore you get very symphonic, operatic music. Here, the music mostly is an ambience. It's a sound effect. It's sort of the life of the city that we don't actually get. It comes through the music, and so it's sort of motor noise and ambience and posturing as music. This is an exception, of course, in this scene because you have the music of the Sufi rapper, Brother Fez, played by a Canadian rapper, a Canadian Somali rapper, Kenan, who was a little nervous about playing a corpse, but finally got into it, and I think rather enjoyed it by the end of it. And it's his, the words to his song are words that Don DeLillo wrote and are in the novel Cosmopolis, but the music is a combination of Howard's and Kanan's.
Wise to the system, prince of the streets, always do things his way, but he had a case.
The refrain, coming from the streets to Mecca, that was written by Kanan.
Thread of dawn awakes the east to the cry, the soul's unfolding. Oh God.
Here we have genuine whirling dervishes.
Prayer and fast. Man gave the news in a slanted room, and it felt like a silver of icy truth. Felt my sad ass.
I love this sort of spaceship floaty feeling of this scene, and you really feel the isolation and the loneliness and the melancholy of Eric and his life, the life that he's made for himself, no question. And you begin to realize, at this point, we begin to realize what the haircut is all about. Because it's not so much the haircut as the place that the haircut represents. That is to say, it represents his past and his childhood, because he's going to a barber who gave him his first haircut when he was a kid in a section of town that he normally wouldn't visit. The pie in the face. It's in the novel. The pastry assassin, played by Mathieu Almaric, a wonderful French actor. And a couple of days later, I got a text from Paul Giamatti who said, "It's unbelievable, but Rupert Murdoch just got a pie in the face when he was holding at some conference." And once again, this was kind of the weirdly prescient elements of the novel Cosmopolis that were kind of coming to haunt us on the set. Things were happening in real life while we were shooting them in the movie, in fictional life, like the Occupy Wall Street movement. Very strange. It didn't change what we did, but it did give it a kind of a potency that it wouldn't perhaps otherwise have had.
You lack of humor, Mr. Bakker.
Matthew flew in to play this role just for one day. He loved the role, and he was very excited to be involved. And I was really excited to get him.
England to save the Queen. They tracked me like a real crane. But please believe one thing. I creamed Fidel 3 times in 6 days when he was in Bucharest years ago.
It's a tremendously funny scene, and what he says is very funny.
Dropped from a tree on Michael Jordan one time. This was a famous flying pie. Museum quality video for the ages. I kissed fucking Sultan of Brunei in his
Once again, this isn't really Eric Packer, a celebrity, because you get you understand that it's the pastry assassin who has brought these photographers and videographers with him to record his attack on capitalism. But it's a very unique thing, and he's not really a paparazzo himself. And here's the crucial, of course, scene with Torval.
You play?
Not really my game.
Shot in downtown Toronto.
Rugby.
For New York.
No, that wasn't my game. You play?
Some.
And once again, really a scene. The actors were so good. I mean, it really was just one take, basically, as was the case in most of the movie. I was able to do a very efficient, pleasingly for me, efficient kind of shooting, because when you have actors who are that good, you don't need to do a lot of takes, a lot of angles. It's a kind of an aesthetic, which I like. I think of it for some reason as relating to the work of Samuel Beckett, the Irish playwright. Kind of an extremely austere kind of aesthetic approach to filmmaking, and which I've seemed to have come to over the years.
Let me see the thing.
Let you see the thing.
And here you will see the only time in the movie that Eric actually looks at Torval. And of course there's a reason for that.
Nice.
Smart too. Scary smart.
Voice recognition.
That's right.
Here we have the kind of subtle use of CG effects. It's really the use of computer-generated imagery has really altered filmmaking completely. And for me, and it's in a great way. I use it relatively subtly because I'm not, normally creating monsters and other worlds and so on. But in this scene, it allowed us to do some things that we wouldn't have been able to do otherwise. First of all, some of the effects here is Eric looking at Torval. And that's, of course, because he's going to kill him. You see the CG effects on the gun, those little lights. That's part of it. But the best part is this. Even with a blank shooting gun, you could never do that. You could never put the gun right up to an actor's face. It's just too dangerous. And also, in this shot, in that scene, you see blood and brains flying out the back of Torval's head. That was all CG, and the gun flash was CG, and the slide of the gun moving back and forwards was CG, and the shell, the cartridge shell flying was also CG. All of those things you could not do that close to an actor's face in the old days when you would have to use a blank shooting gun and so on. Of course, once Eric shoots Torval, and it's kind of a shocking moment, you realize that in a way he's really taking his life apart. He's tearing it down and exposing himself, of course, to violence as well. And you might get the feeling that the whole journey of the day for him is a journey towards death, his own death, his mortality. And before he does that, he has to connect with his past, with his childhood, and he does that in the person of the barber.
Never seen such ratty hair on a human.
And I think once again a lovely portrayal of a kind of subtle regression into infantilism on the part of Rob. It's a beautiful performance here as he sits in the chair that he sat in as a kid.
I have takeout in the fridge that I nibble
and connects with his father, and you understand that they lived just across the street in a tenement.
So, you married that woman?
That's right.
That her family's got like money, unbeknownst. Never thought you'd get married so young, but what do I know? I have chickpea all mashed up, and I have eggplant with rice and nuts.
Give me the eggplant.
Oh, well, good. Your father did not tell you.
Well, for a moment, he has a real connection with this man.
house, and then he went.
Has some easiness, and here's a beautiful.
5.
Exactly.
I really loved that moment. You really, you just see the child Eric there.
Complain, but I could definitely complain. The thing is, I don't want it because ain't time. Let me think what I have that we could drink. Water from the tap. I drink water now. I have a bottle.
The barber is completely self-involved and interested in being a storyteller, and Eric is relinquishing control. You know, he's really at this moment. He's letting the barber control everything. This is the barber's limousine, really, in a way. This is his space. This is his arena, and Eric is a visitor in it, and he allows him to control everything.
Big, bouncy. I drove nights. I was young. What could they do to me?
You see here we have, a character who in a way is once again, Eric seems to be able to relate to people who are not really at his level of sophistication or money and power. He can relate to the driver, he can relate to the Sufi rapper, and he can relate to Cosmo, the rapper, and the barber better than he can to his own wife and to the people that he employs.
I cannot drive with your body on my windscreen.
I ate at the wheel.
But you get the sense that this is really a failed attempt on Eric's part, one last gasp to be able to take his life back down to its childhood and then reconstruct it. But you get the sense that he's not really able to do that, and he realizes that it's a failure and that he can't really do that. And meanwhile, you have both the barber and the driver talking about their past lives. And their, perhaps not childhoods, but their where they came from. And this is a scene about the past for all three men.
I had a little fan that worked in a battery because air conditioning. Forget about it in that day and age. And then I had a drinking cup.
And it not, incidentally, involves driving and people who drive other people.
My daughter with a photograph on the visor.
I gave this guy his voiced haircut. He didn't want to sit in the car.
The barber is played by George Touliatis, who's a wonderful Canadian actor who I'd seen in many, many movies over the years and never got a chance to work with until this scene. And I thought I was excited to cast him in this role.
But where is the chief of security in this situation? I realize he's not with us. We are alone.
I gave him the rest of the night off.
The haircut was very, very important to all of us, and we wanted George to really cut Rob's hair, and to do a bad job of it.
But why?
It was... Rob was really ready to be deranged, to have his hair chopped to pieces in an awkward, asymmetrical way, and to really launch him into the end of the movie. Things like that help an actor to really take the character where he has to go. It was kind of fun for everybody, and caused a lot of questions when Rob appeared at an MTV event with his hair chopped like that, because he did it after the scene.
You'll be careless. They kill you straight away. You'll be reasonable with them. They take a little longer.
And it is as per the novel, really. Once again.
What happened to your eye that it got all twisted that way?
I can see. I can drive. I passed their test.
some wonderfully subtle makeup there by Stéphane Dupuis, who won an Oscar for me for The Fly all those many years ago, 1986. And we still work together. And he does straight makeup. He's doing Rob's makeup as well. But whenever there's a special effects kind of makeup required, Stéphane is just beautifully subtle.
12 hours straight, night after night. Vacations, forget about. But what did I do for protection?
I need to leave.
How come?
I don't know how.
There is, of course, a heavy mythology and presence of handguns in all American art, and particularly American movie making. And it's certainly there in Cosmopolis and in the works of Don DeLillo in general. And so not to be denied, the gun. And so the question, where do these limos go at night, which is kind of an amusing concept, but actually was really the basis of the movie to begin with. DeLillo himself saying, well, I'm a New Yorker, and I see these limos, and they're huge, and there's no place to park in New York, so where do they park? And where do they go? And what are the logistics behind these limos? And so that then becomes a kind of a mantra throughout the movie. Where do the limos go at night?
Where? Next block, there will be an underground garage. Limos only. I will drop off your car, pick up my car, then drive home through the stinking tunnel.
We don't see the driver of the limo until this last sequence at the barber shop. We never see him, and we're rarely outside the limo. It was just kind of, he appears, and you realize that there was another human being in the limo in all those scenes who was just a cog in the machine until the end, and then now he becomes an actual human being with a past and a life. And it's a past and a life that Eric really wants to connect with, even though he can't really quite do it. And there's an emotion here, and a kind of separation anxiety for Eric, because in a way he's saying goodbye to his own life as well. And it's a little inappropriate, really, given how much he doesn't know about this limo driver. But you see, they hug, and it's an emotional moment for Eric. As awkward and maybe inappropriate as you might expect from him, given the strange inner life that he has. I love shooting in the streets in the middle of the night. For me, it's the ultimate, the essence of filmmaking. You know, you're alone. You don't have anybody else around except your crew and your actors, and you've got the city. You've got the city to yourself. I love that. And here's some CG. I mean, you're not really seeing, across the street in the background was actually a huge green screen, because this location was not where the garage was, the underground garage. So, and yet using green screen like that, and it's totally convincing, even with a moving camera. You really feel that you're seeing the garage across the road, but it's a green screen. gives you incredible flexibility. This section of this scene is an actual location, but when Eric kicks open the door, we suddenly are in a set. This is one of the few lines of dialogue I added right here, where Eric says to his own gun, which is not voice recognition enabled, he says Nancy Babbage. I just for some reason really I thought he should say that, as though he's unlocking his own gun and becoming Torval in a way. Now this is the beginning of a very long scene, and the structure is very unusual for a movie, because this is the beginning of a 22-minute sequence between two people, and it's the end of the movie. That really pleased me. I loved the fact that the novel generated a screenplay and a movie that were very extreme in their structure, very not non-traditional, and very sort of destabilizing maybe. And I was aware that it might make for a movie that an audience found difficult to penetrate, but I thought it was worth it because of what you get in return, which is a kind of intensity and strangeness and kind of transporting of the audience to another world that they're really not used to. I mean, when audiences do like, it seems to be comfortable, and have things that they're used to and that they can expect and so on. And I really, myself as a film goer, I really appreciate when those things are all disrupted, and things are not comfortable, and things are not, and you can't anticipate them, and that surprise you. And there are many ways to do that. And here you have two wonderful actors really going very deep into their characters and into the dialogue, the wonderful dialogue that Don DeLillo has written. And they both have guns, so it's very, in some ways it's traditional. It's kind of a standoff with two handguns, and then of course in other ways it's completely not traditional.
Maybe if you told me your name.
You wouldn't know my name.
I know names more than faces. Tell me.
Ben 11.
That's a phony name. It's phony. It's fake.
In some ways, bizarrely, the character of Ben 11, played by Paul Giamatti, is, in a way, the most normal character in the movie, even though he's kind of deranged. But he's really on the edge emotionally, and the things about society and life, the mundane daily living that drive him crazy, are things that I think most people can relate to. So he's a pathological character, and yet he's a really very recognizable and approachable character.
How old are you? I'm interested.
Do you think people like me can't happen?
How old?
We happen.
There was a lot of discussion about whether this movie and the novel were sort of anti-capitalist, but really, even Benno is not an anti-capitalist. In fact, he's upset because he's been shut out of the world of money trading and so on, currency analysis that he loves. And so his complaint against Eric is not that he's an arch capitalist who is ravaging the world, pillaging. It's that he left Benno behind with his high-frequency computer trading and the quickness of his mind and the abstractness of his thought, and that Benno couldn't keep up with him, and it destroyed the world that he had loved, which is the world of traditional currency trading. So you could make the case that though the movie makes comments on the nature of modern Wall Street and its version of capitalism, there aren't really characters who are anti-capitalist in the movie. Even perhaps the rioters in the streets are anti-capitalist. It's interesting, the question of whether the Occupy Wall Street is really anti-capitalist, or is it really just wanting a bigger piece of the capitalist pie and feeling that the advantages of capitalism have been denied to too many people and restricted to only a small percentage. Perhaps the rioters in the streets of this movie are, you could say, given their allusion to Marx, are definitely anti-capitalist, but the foreground characters like Benno really aren't. And this is a scene where, traditionally you would cut to close-ups and so on, and I just really enjoyed holding the wide shot, the long shot, and letting you feel the, Benno's universe.
Yuan eluded me.
And so you brought everything down.
This had never happened.
It was interesting to hear Paul speaking about his character because he felt that it was obvious that Benno was in love with Eric. He was stalking him, but he was in love with him, obsessed with him. And really, until I heard Paul say that when we were doing interviews, I hadn't realized that that was his approach, that underneath all the assaulting and the criticisms that Benno is launching against Eric, that underneath that his main complaint is that he loves him and he can't get close to him.
What else?
Intuition of early death.
What else?
In the book, this entire scene just takes place with them sitting across a table from each other. But of course, you could get away with that in a novel because you're living in the dialogue really and in the minds of the characters. But for me, a scene like this is a kind of sculptural thing or a ballet thing, a dance thing, a choreographical thing. And it really needs movement to
see in your face.
Get all the juice out of the dialogue and the dynamics of the relationship. So
you worked for me, doing what?
I worked with the actors to choreograph the scene, to have them moving around in ways that illustrate the shifting of power back and forth in the scene. So you have them, they have exchanged positions. Now Eric's on the couch and Benno is sitting in the office chair, and just subtle things like that, without making a big deal out of it for the audience. Really, first of all, visually it changes things, and secondly, it illustrates, it gives you a sense of the choreography of power, really, in the scene, even if it's just a dialogue scene, which basically this is.
Richard Sheets.
Of course, it's a dialogue scene with menace, since both men have guns. There's no question about that.
Tell me, do you imagine that I stole ideas from you. Intellectual
But I love
property.
what both actors are doing here. It's really a beautiful duet between them, with lovely subtlety and once again, it's the faces are so great, and the choice of lens and lighting are so crucial, really, to deliver what the actors are giving you.
The things that I believe become facts. They have the time and space of facts.
You're forcing me to be reasonable. I don't like that.
I have severe anxiety.
When you get a set like this, a beautiful set like this, it encourages you as a director to explore it and to use it. Many production designers that I've talked to say they're often frustrated because they will build a set with incredible detail and attention to detail and so on, and you never get to see it. Of course, that's that's a straightforward thing. But for me, it's a playground. It's my playground. And the more elements there are there, and the more interesting angles and nooks and crannies and props and things, the happier I am. And I encourage my actors to play with all of those things and to really use it and explore it as part of the choreography of the scene.
Aggressive action. The crime you want to commit is cheap imitation. It's a stale fantasy. People do it because other people do it.
Of course, you have discussions as a director with your production designer.
It's just another syndrome.
And you see models, and you see sketches, and you see, you can even see computer 3D versions of what you'll, what's being created. But it's always a surprise when you walk onto the set and you really see it in all its detail. If you've got a good production designer, you're surprised and sort of delighted.
It's not just sensibility.
You get very excited about the space and the textures and what you can do with that space and how you can move your actors and things through that space and the meanings that will be provoked by that.
Smell me.
Smell me.
Even when you self-destruct, you have to fail more, lose more, die more than others, stay
My
more
director of photography says that my directing has changed quite radically since we first worked together in 1988 in Dead Ringers. I used to cover everything, which is to say, you'd shoot everything from several different angles, many times, different lenses and so on. I don't do that anymore. I'm not sure whether it's laziness or maturity. I hope maybe it's some kind of artistic maturity, but I really don't shoot things from so many angles and so many different ways. I really seem to know what I want and where I need to be in close and where I'm further away. And I tend to do shots like this where it's a long take with a lot of dialogue, but an interesting positional choreography. And here, for example, very much like a confessional, in a Catholic confessional, with Eric being the priest and Benno confessing. And it wasn't in the script that way, nor in the novel, and it was a discovery, while we were playing with the set and finding our way around the set. And suddenly I started to get the feeling of this aspect of this scene.
I thought all those other people,
And so the position of the actors and that confessional kind of structure made some of the relationship things going on between the two of them very much clearer.
Restaurants filled with people.
Why is Benno saying these things to Eric? And when you think of it as a confession to a priest, it makes a lot more sense.
Separating merchant copy from the customer copy and putting their credit card back in their wallet. This alone could do it. It's people who have doctors that order tests for them. This alone!
It's a confession of
I am helpless.
criminal thoughts and of madness.
No sense to me.
And of course, Eric can relate to both of those things, since he has
Robot soldier.
both had mad thoughts and, at this point in the movie, has also committed murder.
It's all the names they have for shoes. And all those people in the park behind the library. Talking in the sun.
There, in a scene like that, I felt, that's when I feel that editing, cutting around to different angles and stuff is not helpful, and that the intensity of the scene and, of course, the wonderful performances by the actors holds beautifully, and really there's something about the integrity of the shot that makes it more powerful than if you cut to a tighter close-up of Paul, for example, which you could easily justify. And you have to be very certain that you are seeing enough of the actor, both in terms of lighting and angle and closeness to the lens, that the power of his performance will come through, and that you're not losing something by not cutting to a tighter close-up, let's say. And that's a certainty that I think comes only with experience.
It's all I can do to be a person.
And once again, here is a very long take with the two of them moving around within the frame. The camera moves a little bit from side to side.
What are you doing?
But by not cutting, you are making it very clear what the physical relationship between the two of them is. When you cut tight, you sometimes lose that. And here, once again, is something done through CG. The bullet hole going through the hand and the flash of the gun and the hammer going back. That's totally CG. And once again, you couldn't do that in one take, one shot, without cutting. Obviously, you could not do that. And then Rob, just off camera, grabbed a sponge soaked with blood so that when his hand came back, it was not CG blood anymore. It was live blood. Of course, it's fake blood, but... And then they had this strangely intimate moment, which no one anticipated would be quite so intimate. Once again, it's almost as though it's the priest, rabbi, and the confessor, and but the roles have been kind of reversed. It's hard to know who's confessing what to whom.
You should have listened to your prostate. What? You tried to predict movements and the...
Well, here we see that the prostate exam scene was not just a kind of a lark on the part of Don DeLillo writing it, but that it has metaphysical significance later. Here, the idea of asymmetry. His prostate is asymmetrical. That is to say, organic things are not so predictable, and they're not so rigorous, and they don't fall into line with sort of computer symmetry, and that therefore there's an element of human life and of organic life and life on Earth that Eric has been missing in his calculations, and that has really led him to his downfall. Of course, there's a sense in which he's committing suicide financially, and that this, that the novel is not really talking about the economic meltdown that everybody talks about. It's really talking about Eric Packer's economic meltdown that he has induced himself, that he's deliberately committing financial suicide, really, by obstinately betting against the yuan the way he has.
Chairs and drinking at those tables on the terrace after work.
Benno is pointing out to him that his techniques for investing and trading, the ones that have shut Benno out of the career that he loves, that those techniques are flawed and faulty. And it all comes back down to the asymmetrical prostate. Something organic and unpredictable.
You have to die no matter what.
I can tell you my situation has changed.
Once again, here we have a crucial scene with the two men that is really one shot. And pretty much one take. They were so good.
You did it to yourself.
And to make it work, I needed here to have focus in the foreground and the background, which meant we had to really pump up the light on the set, even though it doesn't look bright. But in order to get the f-stop that we needed to get depth of field and to get to have both faces sharp, which of course for this scene is crucial. And once again, you could have done it by jumping back and forth, cutting tighter. But I really wanted the audience to feel the tension between the two, and that they'd feel the tension in themselves trying to figure out which character to look at and have their eyes go back and forth and so on. And so I really felt that doing it in one shot, one setup basically, was the right way to do it, to get the best emotional juice out of the scene, and then visually as well, to see what's happening with both of them, and with both actors not really being able to see what the other actor is doing, which is very unusual for them and difficult, but I think launched them into some really interesting moments.
But the air you breathe.
And here you see Eric, you see things happening on Eric's face that you've not seen anywhere else in the movie. And it's a kind of a sadness and a desperation and a vulnerability. And see here, Paul has no idea what Rob is doing. We didn't rehearse this, and we really just did one take, basically. And I thought that uncertainty really played the reality of what the characters would have been experiencing in that situation.
In their pajamas, eating mutton.
Paul would have preferred to rehearse things, but but he was very good when he's so good spontaneously and intuitively that he had no problem working the way I wanted to work, which is no rehearsals, except when you're just blocking the scene. Then, of course, you are being involved, but you're not really shooting the scene at that point.
I wanted you to heal me, save me.
Once again, the sort of the priest-confessor relationship. I wanted you to save me. Even a Christ-like idea, the Savior. And the whole idea of a kind of a strange love comes through there of Benno for his former boss. Now, the end titles are unlike the action painting of it's kind of a pseudo Jackson Pollock at the beginning. These are pseudo Rothkos. They're not real Rothkos. I think we couldn't have afforded actually to use those, but they're created by the title designer, who also did the the credits on A Dangerous Method, and it's meant to suggest that the two artists bookend the movie. The agitated, aggressive Jackson Pollock action painting, and at the end the Mark Rothko kind of Zen-like serenity, surrender, stillness that Eric Packer was seeking in trying to buy the Rothko Chapel. And so in death, he has achieved that. We assume that he has died. In the book, there is a journal that Benno writes, and he says that Eric Packer is lying dead at his feet. But I couldn't bear to have him pull the trigger in the movie, actually, I have to say. we could have put the gunshot over when we go to black, and you would understand that he had died and was shot. But I think we assume that ultimately he has. But I wanted to leave the two characters kind of frozen in time, a kind of an eternal moment between life and death, and that was my conceit. And I take full responsibility for that. Once again, in the novel, you know that Benno has killed Eric.